Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, Apple Podcasts. On Android, we recommend Spotify or the 5 Reasons YouTube channel. Also, check out Discord. I drop new information on there before you're going to hear it on the podcast or before you get it on Twitter. Also, can communicate with Heat fans all day long. We do Q&As, lots of other cool stuff. $2.99 per month. Get in there before we raise it. Link is right here in the description. Also, check out the great sponsors of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. You know who subscribes to Off the Floor, Lynette. Reach out to her at insurancebylynette.com, 954-581-8800. That's 954-581-8800. Life insurance, car insurance, all kinds of different insurance. Again, I recommend the car insurance because if you have a bad driving record, she will absolutely take care of you. Reach out at insurancebylynette.com. Again, it's 954-581-8800. And now, today's episode.
Down the Biscayne. Yeah. 5 on the floor. Ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing. You can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frogs. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing. Got an all band. Y'all seen the block. Stop with one hand. And Pat we trust. It's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to 5 on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, and Alex Toledo, plus others from the 5 Reasons Sports Network.
All right, welcome back to 5 on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick at 5 Reasons Sports. I got Alex Toledo. You can follow him at Tropical Blanket. I got Greg Sylvander. You can follow him at Greg Sylvander. Brady will be joining us on podcasts throughout the week. Happy July 4th to everybody. We didn't necessarily plan on doing this morning, but when we have new information, we will break in with podcasts. So I do have a lot of new information and explanatory information. We understand that Heat fans are frustrated. We get it. I mean, I was looking at, the Heat can't even wish a happy July 4th to people. I'm looking at this. This is an IG post from the Heat. Have a safe and happy 4th of July, Heat Nation. And the first comment here is, we're certainly safe from getting any superstars on our team. We're also safe from winning a championship. That's how safe we are. All right. I'm going to explain what's going on. Okay. And the reality is you're not going to get this anywhere else. So we appreciate you subscribing to 5 on the Floor. Let me give you what is old business or about a current player, and then we'll go forward. I can report that the Heat are fully expecting Terry Rozier to be ready for training camp. So they held him out last year on doctor's advice because they were told that the neck injury, which again is a dangerous injury in general, anything with a neck, back, etc., the neck injury could get worse if he continued to play. End of story. I know people want the whole backstory about how it happened and all that stuff. I'm just telling you why they made the decision, and I'm telling you he's expected to be ready for training camp, and he's already shooting and doing some other stuff. So, provided that he's not traded, he'll either be the Heat's starting point guard, or as Pat kind of intimated in his press conference, maybe he's the 6th man, but he'll be one of their top 6 players, okay, if he's here. So that's number one. By the way, Greg, Alex, hello. Why don't we, you know what, let's do it this way. Why don't you guys get in on things I say, and then I'll go to the next thing, because we got a lot to get to. Thoughts on Rozier? I mean, it's good news in a sea of bad news, or at least perceived bad news about the organization lately, right?
I mean, yeah, right. Like, I think that was like the big mystery to finish the season was what's going on with Terry Rozier's neck. It happened out of nowhere, and there wasn't very many updates on it. So to hear that he'll be ready to go for next season is good, because I mean, one of the only things that you can look forward to as a Heat fan is being able to, get a full year of him, having, go through participating in training camp, and to actually have, a full season with them and just be fully integrated with the team. So to hear that he's ready for the start of the season is, good news. Like, you don't want him to be even more delayed, because frankly, like they could use the stuff that he brings.
Greg, do you expect to start?
The one thing I want to jump in on Terry Rozier is that it's interesting as we watch this offseason play out, and this is the moment that I'll mention it, because I was in full support of the Terry Rozier trade, but it appears now as if had they let Kyle Lowry's expiring contract just expire, they would have had access to the mid-level. They would be further away from these dreaded aprons. And so It's unfortunate that now I think fans that were super excited about Terry Rozier joining the Heat are now a little apprehensive about how is he going to fit? How does he finish next to Tyler? Stuff like that. Because you're looking at how strapped they are in this offseason, and it has a lot to do with the fact that instead of letting Kyle Lowry's bloated expiring contract just expire, they invested in Terry Rozier.
Yeah, and again, it's unfortunate we didn't get to see what it looked like. I have serious concerns about a Rozier Hero backcourt, and I think others share those concerns. But if they're both back, and there's no guarantee at this point, offseason is still relatively young. If they're both back, then they're going to have to figure it out at times. I mean, that's just the nature of it. Even if they don't start together, they're going to play a lot together, and they're going to have to figure out how to cover that up defensively. All right, second thing we're going to get to is Caleb Martin. Okay. So the Miami Heat wanted Caleb Martin back. I mean, we'll make that clear. Okay. They wanted Caleb Martin back. And let me just go through the specifics of what they could have offered and now what other teams or they can offer, and why it appears, at least at this time, that Caleb's camp made a big mistake. Okay. So the Heat wanted him to opt in to the contract, which was what, $7.1 million. And at that stage, they had the right to offer up to a 40% raise on that. Okay, so let's do the math on that. That's an additional 3.5 or something. Well, not 3.5, $3 million roughly. Okay, maybe get it over 10 million bucks, right? And then raises as you go forward. Okay, 8%. They could offer up to an 8% increase from that year over year. Okay. And you also have the right to offer a 5-year deal. They didn't want it. Okay. Now, I'm not going to confirm.
Who's they?
Exactly the number. The representative. Okay. They didn't. They thought his market was bigger. And I will say, the media reports, and this is why media reports sometimes, confuse things, because some media reports are real and some media reports are others pumping up a number because they want the player to leave this current team or because the agent is doing it or whatever to create leverage. The media reports were Caleb was going to make north of $13 million. That's what was out there. Okay. But the Heat basically said, look, we can offer this now, but if you go out and explore and opt out, we may not be in position to offer it because of other business that we need to do, etc. So he opts out. And you have to understand, the most he can get from another team is 4 years. And the most he can get in terms of raises is 5%. All right. Also, you're looking at no state tax, other things like that do matter in terms of the overall value of the contract. Caleb does not appear to have the market that his representation thought he had. All right. It has not materialized. But the problem now is, and I want to be clear on this, okay? The Heat are roughly $7 million under the second apron. I will tell you definitively, I will put anybody's life on it. They are not going into the second apron. It's not happening. We've explained why. It's not just about being quote unquote cheap. It does not make sense. There are vehicles you cannot use in the second apron. Okay. And they are not, look, we've dealt with this lack of flexibility that they have for the last, 3 off seasons. They're not going to give themselves less flexibility. Okay. And with all due respect, not for Kel'el Martin. Okay. Who they like. All right. So it appears now that the best that Caleb's going to do on the open market is maybe around what the Heat have to offer. But right now, the Heat are not in a rush to offer the money to anybody because they want to see what falls to them. We'll get into the DeMar DeRozan situation in a minute. Okay. So again, I hate to say it, this looks like a Dennis Schroeder situation. And I'm not belittling the representation. I'm just I've known this is experienced representation, but this is the grand point. Okay, that I think has to be resolved here in the NBA. It appears that a lot of agents do not understand the new CBA, and And I've been told by people inside the Heat that really only one person on their side understands it. Okay, like one person in the league, and it happens to be Andy Ellisberg. Okay, but it just appears that a lot of these agents don't understand it, and so there's, and I can also tell you, Caleb still has interest in coming back to the Heat. They just don't have the money right now. They had it, but they don't have it. Does that make sense to you guys? And
It
I get
does.
the point. Would you move on from it? Because it appears that they kind of have to.
They got $5.2 million. That's what they have to offer. And so that shit is fascinating to me, the way that this has played out with Caleb, because coming off that Eastern Conference Finals run, etc., you just thought that the market would be more robust, that you'd at least be able to get close to a mid-level contract. You know what I mean? And so that now that they're in a position where it was a little bit of a work with me kind of scenario. If you opt in, then we'll take care of you and that kind of thing. And players have kind of deviated from working with teams like that in the last few off seasons. And now I think you may start to see players need to do that, because the squeeze of the market is going to dictate that, like, they're not going to be able to get the money elsewhere. I do think they kind of have to move on, except for you can just kind of have a standing offer of, if you'll come for the taxpayer mid-level, we'll give it to you. But to your point, that could go to Haywood Highsmith. That could go to an external player if they need to replace both of those guys. But also they could not use it. Like, that's another option here that I think we need to consider. And so it's fascinating to me that they were ready to invest with Caleb had he worked with them. He's had injury concerns and stuff like that, and they were still going to invest in him. And he made that kind of a decision I think everyone would have predicted he made, and now it could really backfire.
Well, it's, again, sometimes the player makes the decision and sometimes the agent convinces him to make the decision, and something broke down. I know that, I'll just say this. I know that there's hope that Caleb understands the Heat wanted him back. Okay. But at this point, I don't really know. My guess is it's probably not going to happen, but that's just a guess. Alice, I'm going to go to you on the next one. Okay.
Really quick note about Caleb, by the
Okay.
way. Everything Leif said is true. The other thing that they can still do, if Caleb and his camp, would of course be okay with it, is, you said it, they're roughly $7 million under the second apron. If you want to get specific, I think it's like 6.8 million. And so you can offer him a contract just below that, where like the first year starts just below that, and then you give him raises from there. But that is still like a significantly smaller contract than him and his people thought they were getting. So I don't necessarily think this is going to happen.
And you also then are not going to use. You're also then not going to use the vehicle. You're not going to use the taxpayer mid-level then, because then you don't.
No, I mean, well, this is
where
second. So I mean, the thing is, you get hard capped at the second apron if you use the taxpayer mid-level. So I mean, I had to imagine they would rather just bring back one of their own guys than use the taxpayer mid-level for an outside free agent who they probably think isn't as good. So I wouldn't be surprised if one of Caleb or Haywood were to take that deal eventually, but I don't think either one of them are like, that's what we were looking for. But that's about it at this point. Like, I think it would be like a contract starting at about 6.7-ish mil, and then with raises, going forward, maybe it's a 3-4 year deal. I don't know if that's what they want to do, but that is still available to them. I think it seems like they're still trying to bring one of those two back.
Well, let me pivot to the next guy then, and let me to Haywood, and then we'll go to break. But let me explain one thing here, okay, about the new CBA. And I put this on Discord. We recommend again that you go to Discord and sub there. The Heat did some things prior to the new CBA that they would not do now, because the new CBA changed some rules. And again, this has happened to the Heat before. If you go back to the sign-in trades they executed for LeBron and Bosh, which first thing forced them to give up 4 first-round picks, and also, I mean, you do it again. You got 2 titles and 4 finals appearances, but I'm just saying it forced them to give up 4 first-round picks and to give opt-outs after the 4th year, which of course LeBron left, and then they had to pay Bosh over the top. And then of course that became an issue with Dwayne. The rules were changed right after that, basically. So this has happened before, but the Heat gave the Heat do not regret the contracts of Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson in terms of their market value. They don't. Okay. I know some are going to argue about that. Duncan, they believe, was paid like shooters were supposed to be paid at that point. And again, I thought Duncan lived up to the contract last year. And Tyler was paid according to a lot in his draft class, who actually he had played better than, for the most part, like an RJ Barrett, etc. And so they don't regret that. I too can tell you what they do regret. Okay. So Tyler Hero has some unlikely to be earned incentives in his contract. And these incentives apply for all 4 years of the deal. He's entering the second year of it. And basically, he gets an additional $2.5 million if he plays at least 75% of the regular season games, which he did not do this past year, and gets one of these. Okay, well, actually, it's different numbers for each of them. He gets $1 million additionally if he wins MVP, $1.5 million if he wins Defensive Player of the Year. I mean, I don't mean to laugh, but I don't even understand the point of these. $1 million if he's first or second team all in NBA. And then the only one that was like a shot was $500,000 for third team all NBA. Here's the problem. Okay. They all count against the aprons. Okay. Unlikely bonuses count against the aprons. So part of the reason that they're only $7 million roughly under the second apron is because of these unlikely to be earned bonuses. I mean, the rules change. I still don't understand, and I probably should have asked for clarification on this with people I've spoken to, but I still don't even understand the point of them. I guess I don't know. It's window dressing, I guess. I don't.
It makes a deal. Just, it adds a little bit of like a sweetener on top, I guess. But this is the thing with this, and we can't lose sight of it. And I was the biggest proponent of trading Kyle Lowry. But had they just let Lowry expire in retrospect, and they knew that these apron restrictions were coming, I am harping back on it. Like it's or harken back, whatever the phrase is. They also should take a little bit of responsibility for the fact that they knew that this was coming, and they did swap Terry with a pick for Kyle Lowry, which at the time we thought it was the right move. But now when
We
you
all
see
liked it. Yeah, we all liked
financially,
it. I get it, but we all liked it, right? And that's the thing here. So I mean, they were trying to give themselves a chance. And then now we can argue whether that was delusional or not, but I argued in favor of it. And who knew again that Jimmy was going to get hurt and all that sort of stuff. But they as Alex said, Terry gave him some of the things they were looking for. But then he got hurt, and that's why I started with him, because I do think that is a factor in those. All right, I want to mention a couple sponsor here, and then we'll get to Haywood DeRozan after that. Okay. I want to tell you about another great sponsor, 5 Reasons Sports Network, our friends over at Prize Picks. You could have bet on the hot dog contest today. Go to prizepicks.com, use the code 5 FIVE, get that initial deposit matched up to $100. Again, Prize Picks is our official fantasy partner. And there's plenty of stuff on there, even though there's no NBA, NFL, or NHL right now. Go to prizepicks.com and use the code 5 FIVE. All right, Alex, you mentioned Highsmith. The Heat are interested in having him back. I can tell you that his representation also thought that his market value was close to the mid-level. Not the taxpayer mid-level, the bigger mid-level. And that also has not materialized. But there is interest in having him back. But again, it's kind of an either or at this point. It's him or it's Caleb, although that doesn't seem to be Caleb now, or it's somebody from the outside, which again, we'll talk about one particular player in the middle, or it maybe end up being nothing if nothing materializes that makes sense. But they did have interest in Haywood coming back, and it appears to be another case, since he's still on the market and money has been drying up. It appears to be another case of, a misread of the market by a player's representative. That's what it appears to me.
for me, I'll quickly
Yeah,
jump
either
in.
of you guys. Yeah.
I just want to say that I think that this is the most likely player to return. I think Haywood Highsmith may ultimately find that a number near that taxpayer mid-level, even though they don't have to spend that, but just like in that tier of salary, $5-6 million is going to be his market. And I could see him coming back. That would be my hunch there. Caleb Martin, that ship, I believe, has sailed. Although if they had to choose between the two, I think they probably would go Caleb. I think it might be
That's
more
why they
likely
did,
that
by the
Haywood
way.
Highsmith comes back.
Well, they kind of did, if you think about it. I mean, they kind of did choose, and I understand it. I think Caleb's upside is higher. I can also tell you that Spo's going to have influence in what they do with that money, because they do lean on him for stuff like that. Alex, would you just give Haywood if he asked for it, just give him $5 million and say, okay, here, we'll run it back?
Absolutely. I think getting him back at the taxpayer mid level, him or Caleb, frankly, would be a good deal for the Heat. Like, I think that's pretty good value. Now, I think you can start to question it, whether it's for Caleb. Jesus, I just did that on the last podcast too. Whether it's for Caleb or Haywood, like if you want to offer them 3-4 year deals, that's a different conversation. But if you're just talking about like first year $5 million, absolutely. And like I said, like same thing I said for Caleb earlier, they can do for Haywood. They can offer as much as around 6.7 mil on the first year and with raises afterwards. But that's the most they can offer in the current situation that they're in right now. And if they wanted to get under the first apron to be able to offer more, they would have to offload one of their bigger contracts. I don't know if that's going to happen, and I'm sure we can, we're going to get into that as far as like the DeMar conversation. But with where they're at right now, I think the taxpayer mid-level would be a big time disappointment for either Caleb or Haywood, right? Like from their ends, and I think that he would be pretty happy if they could get one of them back, for that cost.
All right, let's get to DeRozan. This is why I like podcasts, because it's tough to explain this stuff in a tweet. I want to be clear on one thing here. I'm not challenging another reporter, and the last reporter, honestly, that I would ever challenge on information when it comes to the teams in town is Barry Jackson from the Herald. So again, I've known Barry for long enough that we were annoyed that the Heat passed on Michael Redd to take Eddie House, okay, when we were waiting on the draft in the second round of the SunTrust building. So again, I'm not questioning somebody else's reporting, and I appreciate when other reporters don't question mine. I'll just say that this is the information that I have, okay? There was a conversation between DeRozan's representation and the Heat, okay? Basically, the agent wanted to know if the Heat would like DeMar DeRozan. Yes, we'd love DeMar DeRozan. This is what we have to offer, $5.2 million. So essentially, after that, okay, it was, all right, we could explore a sign and trade. Now, here's the thing about a sign and trade. It's got to be a 3-year deal, okay? And the other team has to cooperate. And I can tell you the Bulls were not interested in contracts from the Heat. They want picks. So there's nothing else to talk about, okay? I can tell you, if DeMar DeRozan says, I will take $5.2 million, DeMar DeRozan will have a press conference with the Miami Heat. And then people say, you said they didn't want DeMar. No, they want DeMar. This is the price, this is what they have under the second apron to pay DeMar. But this plays into what we're talking about with guys like Caleb and Haywood now, because if there's the potential of a DeMar DeRozan type player or something close that could fall to that number, because again, a lot of the agents don't seem to understand the CBA and the market dynamics and everything as they are now, then they're not going to end up re-signing Haywood or Caleb, because they're going to get a player of the caliber of DeMar DeRozan, who even at his age is a better player than Caleb or Haywood. Okay? That's where that stands. Greg.
I mean, I think we've all said it was pretty unlikely, just because the non-taxpayer mid-level would be, I would think, the minimum DeMar DeRozan would be looking for around the league, considering what his past salaries have been. He would have to take a huge haircut on that salary. So to me, this was never a really realistic option. I never bought into it very much, even though there could be conversations. And I even saw that there was a report that, and we referenced this on the last show, that the Heat were the favorites to land DeMar DeRozan. It's just not realistic. And it's just, if the market dries up to the point that he is willing to accept $5.2 million, they're going to have decisions to make, because that means the market will likely have dried up for a few other players too, like Kel'el, like Highsmith, etc. So I wouldn't expect DeMar DeRozan to eventually land in Miami. I think that he'll end up finding a deal for slightly more than that from somewhere else.
He's going to get a deal for a lot more than that, I think. He's still a very effective player, even if he doesn't fit on every team. And honestly, one of the teams he doesn't really fit on is this one. But again, if he's going to play for $5 million, you take him. Okay. I mean, if he's making slightly more than Thomas Bryant, no offense to Thomas Bryant, you take him. That's the way that this is. And as far as the Alec Burks move, they saw an opportunity to get a player that they thought actually played pretty well in the playoffs when he got an opportunity at really no risk, no cost. Doesn't work out. It doesn't work out. But I mean, you add a shooter. There's no harm in that. It doesn't mean anything else. Alice, I'll go to you on the next thing because I want to get to it.
Can I make a quick note on DeMar?
Yes, you can.
There was a report yesterday about Barry Jackson saying that the Kings have been involved there, and the Kings have been kind of thrown into a lot of these star names. Like we heard talk about them maybe being interested in Ingram, them maybe being interested in Larry Markkinen. If it's true what you're saying, that the Bulls are not interested in getting contracts in return, potential sign and trade, regarding DeMar DeRozan, then that kind of takes the Kings out of the ballpark too. And so I'm starting to wonder, like, what is his market? Where is he going to play this season? Because I don't think it's going to be back in Chicago. The Lakers thing seems kind of, out of the plans as well. The Kings are not, the Bulls are not trying to get contracts in return. So I don't know how involved the Kings can be. So yeah, like there might be the possibility of DeRozan just settling for that taxpayer mid-level. I don't know. I wouldn't bet on it, but like I just really market is for him right now.
And then again. But then, Alex, to that point, if that's the case, then you hold it a little longer, right? Unless there's some other opportunity that's tremendous that presents itself, and then I know again, if Caleb leaves for similar money to the taxpayer mid-level, Heat fans gonna be like, "Oh, you missed out on Caleb," but like it makes sense to wait a week, doesn't it? Like just to see.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to wait. I don't know if I just think the whole situation with DeMar is a little confusing right now, especially while you've got like the marketing thing going on. Like I don't know if Brandon Ingram's gonna get moved, so I just feels like there's so many there's a lot of things going on, and then at the same time, it's like with the Heat, like DeMar DeRozan on the $5 million taxpayer mid level would be a huge, that's a huge bargain for the Heat if that were to happen. But is that with the roster as it currently stands, is that what's missing, or is it perimeter defense? And so I feel like they would want to bring Caleb or Haywood. Yeah, and it's like that's why we were discussing the possibility like a couple of days ago, where it's like, well, if they wanted to get under the first apron to offer DeMar a good amount, if they offloaded one of their bigger contracts, they would be able to do that to give him an amount that I think is closer to what he wants, and also be able to bring back one of Caleb or Haywood. And so that's why I feel like I don't really see either of these things happening. It just feels like it's too complicated. I'm sure the Heat like DeRozan. I'm not doubting that. I'm sure they appreciate him. He's Jimmy's friend. Like I said, I think, frankly, he's a better scorer than Tyler. Can do it on isolation and can get to the free throw line, is a decent passer. Tyler is just obviously a much better three-point shooter. So you'd be exchanging, for as much as Tyler takes middies, he takes a lot of threes, and you'd be exchanging those for even more middies, some free throw attempts. So I think it's just a weird fit, and I think like everything that he would have to do to make it viable doesn't seem like stuff they would do. But, again, I don't know where he's going to end up. It feels totally up in the air right now.
All right, so let's get to this star conversation here, okay? Because I'm saving this for the 30th minute so the aggregators don't get to it, okay? They will anyway. So I'm going to try to word this as carefully as I can. All right, the Donovan Mitchell stuff. All right. There were no conversations with Cleveland. Please don't aggregate it without listening to the rest of this. Okay. This does not mean the Heat are asleep. Okay? There were no conversations with Cleveland because Mitchell is was still under contract, okay, and was looking at an extension. So if he had declined the extension, I believe, and I don't have this on full, I believe the Heat would have explored it, but he didn't. He didn't decline the extension. Okay, he took the extension, and so basically, there's really nothing to talk about there. And I know where this is going. Okay, I know where this is going. Ethan's making excuses for the front office. They don't want to get a star player. Okay, I know where this is going, and then we're going to talk about trade to close this thing. It's not that they don't want a star player. It's not that they wouldn't have paid the freight for it. He was not available at that point. Okay. Now, Dame last year was available under contract, but available. Okay. Because he made it clear he wasn't going to stay in Portland. That general manager wouldn't deal with the Heat. So here's where the star player thing is. And I can tell you what frustrates the Heat a lot, okay, is that there are players that they were never really in on for one reason or another, which was not negligence necessarily, but just circumstance. And yet every time that these players are put out there, then it's, oh, the Heat missed on another one. Well, they missed on another one who was not an option. Okay. I can tell you flat out, all right. The one guy who was offered to the Heat, all right, and the Heat did not act on it was Bradley Beal. And we told you why they did that. Because Pat asked the agent, will he waive the no trade clause? The agent said no. The player was traded to the agent's son in Phoenix. And now the Suns are trying to get off of that contract. But he has a no trade clause. Okay. So that's the one. The other one that people are going to mention is Kyrie. And I know, again, there are other issues that were involved in that. Okay. But besides the political stuff, the Heat had concerns because he's basically torched his way out of like 3 previous places. All right. It's worked out in Dallas so far. Okay, good. Good for Kyrie. Good for the Mavs. We'll see if it lasts. All right. But that's the one. And to be honest, that's the only one that's gotten his team out of the second round of any of these players that have been discussed. So I'm just saying, like, again, I'm not making excuses for them. I'm just saying the Mitchell stuff, would they have been interested in Donovan Mitchell? Yes. Here's the thing about the NBA that's different from the NFL. All right. There are only so many players. There are only so many stars. Identifying good players in the draft is hard. It's harder than it used to be because players don't play as much in college. You're evaluating, basically high school kids. You're evaluating international players, etc. But once they get to the NBA, everybody knows what everybody can do. It's not like, oh my God, Pat has this genius idea. This Lauri Markkanen guy, he can really shoot. No, okay. Utah identified him as somebody who maybe had more potential than he had shown, even as a high pick, in Cleveland and Chicago, right? Good for them. They got a really good player who now is a really good asset, right? But the other stuff, like, this is not complicated. Like this, we talk about the same players they talk about. Like it's not like we're great scouts here. I mean, we watch Anthony Edwards play. Would you like to have that guy? Yes. Okay. Like this is not, once they get to this level and they start to develop, then you know what they are. Okay. It's why also Pat, and I will say this is shortcutting it, but it is what it is. He's always liked these guys in the kind of their late 20s, okay, into their 30s, okay, when you've seen what they can do already. All right. It's Adam Simon's job and his team to identify, okay, is Kel'el Ware, like, does that look like a player? Okay, to me, that's harder. Okay, that's a lot harder. All right. The rest of this shit is not that complicated. It's just understanding, okay, how do we have the assets? Can we get this player in, etc. We can have long conversations about asset management and all that, how much the new CBA has affected it, etc. Okay, but this idea that they don't want a star is, why would they not want a star? Okay, now they believe they have a star, and I can tell you that they're banking on Jimmy Butler to be one this year. He was not last year. Okay? He was not available enough to be a star. They're banking on him in a contract year to play his ass off and to benefit from that. Do they believe they'll contend even if he does? No. They're not delusional. Okay. Boston just won a championship and they return everybody. And that's just one team. OKC has loaded up. Okay. Philadelphia has loaded up. Milwaukee has improved. Okay. Or slightly. Okay. And you figure second year with Dame and Giannis. Okay. That they understand it. They're not asleep, but it's just they're waiting for the right opportunity. All right. And so I'll close with this and I'll let you guys close. Would Trey be the right opportunity? I haven't been told yes, and I haven't been told no. Okay, I'll just say that flat out. All right. If something makes sense for them and a player is going to come to them in a way that doesn't compromise their asset pool, all right, or financial flexibility going forward, vehicle flexibility going forward, second apron, they're not paying the second apron. They're not going to the second apron. They will look at it. Okay. I don't believe, to my knowledge, they've ruled out Trey, but it depends what it is. What do they want? What does Atlanta want? Apparently they're going to get less than 2 first-round picks and a player, which is what they got for DeJounte, right? So we'll see. But all I want to say is this, right? Are they in an I'll let you close, right? Are they and Alex, are they in an ideal position? No. Okay. They're not where they should be contending. All right. But they feel they're a move or two away from being there, in addition to the growth of some of their young guys. And they're just waiting for the right one. Greg.
I'm glad you mentioned the last part because I was going to go right back to when you said that they internally do not, and this is just accepting reality, that they're not contenders. I think fans then say, get creative, maybe take a risk, but also, is it time to pivot and strip it down to some degree? And we know the Heat don't historically do that, but drastic times call for drastic measures, and second aprons means maybe sometimes you gotta and first aprons and all these new things that are in the mix. I just think that they have to consider all options. And so I think that's where fans get frustrated, is they feel like there's a lack of creativity and maybe some poor planning combined. And that's in a tough position to be in, because then if you know that you're not going to contend, even if your superstar comes in and plays a legitimate amount of games at a high level, then what are we doing here? And so like that's a little of a defeatist kind of point of view. And it surprises me to a degree. And I understand that they're 1 or 2 moves away, but you can't just remain 1 or 2 moves away. At some point you have to execute. And I think the Rozier trade maybe has them a little more cautious in what they execute, because they have to think about the go forward implications.
Yeah, Alex, you're on mute.
Okay. Sorry about that. Do you hear me now? You guys hear me? Okay, sorry about that. So, like, I feel like they're just in such a tough spot, and like, you know, the stuff that Leif was talking about earlier with Terry trade, where like it kind of kept them from being able to stay under the first apron. They had to invest a first round pick into it. They have to have considered that stuff. I think they have to have considered those factors when they were making that trade, and essentially just decided that it was worth the risk, right? Because that's what they did with the Terry trade. Like, individually, we all liked the trade because we all thought that like his skill set could help the Heat. But now they're at this point where they're even more strapped for cash, right? Like, they just don't have many things to offer. They don't have damn near any levers to pull that they would have if they would have remained under the first apron by simply letting Kyle Lowry walk. And they're not in that position anymore. And so what do you do now? You mentioned getting creative, and it's like you can't have it both ways as a Heat fan, right? Because you like, some people will look at like the Thunder or, you know, name young team here with all their first round picks, and it's like, well, like, oh, you want to be like them, except you have to be bad for years most of the time to be able to do that. And then at the same time, it's like, oh, go after Trae Young. If you go after Trae Young, you're likely going to have to give up like several of your young guys because you don't have the first round picks to offer. I think they have like 1 tradable first right now. I got to check on that, but I think that's the case. Even though they do own more first in the future, but because of the stepping rule and all these protections and of picks that they currently owe, it's a little complicated. So if you don't have more than a first round pick to offer, you would likely have to give up all the young guys you drafted over the past few years just to be able to get a Trae Young, which, by the way, I'm completely open to. I think a guy like that, a one-man offense, one of the best shooters, scorers, and passers in the league, who fits the Jimmy and Bam timeline, I think it would fit pretty well. I think they could work around his defense and, cover it up, and that's the fatal flaw, and you deal with it, because what they've got right now, it's like what Leif is saying. There's no direction. They're admitting themselves that they're not a contender. It's like, yeah, they've got a lot of nice players individually, but the mix together isn't necessarily a contender. And so it feels like they have to pick a direction and not just, oh, we're going to hope Jimmy plays really well and that everything works out at the end next summer. I just think it's very risky. And like, I understand them wanting to, wait for the right trade to pop up. And, it's still pretty early in the summer. So I don't blame them at all. I think it's more about, if they head into the season with the same roster and nothing has changed, they probably got to pick a direction. As of right now, I'm more than fine with them waiting for the opportunity to trade for a star. And I hope they're not too stubborn, to see, like, when it comes to like guys like Trae Young, who is like, oh, you're going to have to trade all these things. You're not always going to be able to get a damn near superstar level talent for cheap. Like, look at what Mikal Bridges just went for. And it's not going to decide the market. Like, you could still get guys for better value than what we went for. But just like being like, oh, we'll only trade for this guy if it's, at our cost of, what we want, a first round pick and maybe one young player. Like, it's hard to expect that nowadays. Like, if you're really in this championship window, you make desperate decisions. That's what the Knicks did. That's why they traded 4 unprotected first along with another pick swap. The Heat don't have access to any of those things. So it's either and restash your draft capital, which we all know they're probably not going to do, or go all in. I feel like they have to make a decision, because this whole like balancing both timelines thing, with the way it stands right now, I really like Nico. I really like Jaime. And I was excited about the draft that they had. Are those things going to help you now in the short term if your goal is to win with Jimmy? If you've already moved on mentally from Jimmy and it's like you're already thinking about the next build, then that's a completely different story. But that just goes back to the thinking that they need to pick a direction. And look, whichever one it is, it's fine. Just pick one. I think Trae Young is a damn good player. If that were to become available, I think it would immensely help the Heat. I'm going to be upset, and I think a lot of people are, if it's just like, a couple months from now, he gets traded somewhere else. It's like, oh, man, there's the last domino. Oh, the Heat, they couldn't get it at their price. They thought that trading this, and this was too much. And this is like, oh, man, here we are again. And it just feels like this never-ending loop. Please just pick a direction.
But here's the thing about that. They don't – I understand this idea of not going to training camp with a roster that is similar or worse to last season's. I mean, they've lost DeLon. They're likely going to lose at least Haywood or Kel'el, maybe both. And I understand the perception of that. But I'll just close with this, okay? That there is – you don't have to make a trade before the start of the season to make a trade that affects next season, right? I mean, there are 4 months or 3 months prior to the trade deadline before that, and you don't know what's going to become available. And yes, I know what people are going to say if Trae is traded for not what Heat fans think he's worth, and trust me, I'm prepared for all of that. But I'm not saying, okay, that this team is good enough to win anything. I think they're probably, even with Jimmy playing 65 games, they're probably the 7th best team in the East, 6th or 7th. That's not a place that they want to be. It's not a place that they belong. But again, circumstances, a lot of them have played against them. I think they need to improve this team, but I'll just say this. They know they need to improve this team. Okay, so it's at some point they will do something to improve this team, but we also got to be careful not to have it both ways, because we say, well, desperate teams do desperate things. We just spent a lot of time talking about a trade that we liked, the Terry Rozier trade, which has made things more complicated for them now, and a trade that I didn't like, but fans wanted, which was Bradley Beal. Okay. And I'll just say this. Sometimes the best moves you make are the ones you don't. Anyway, that's what we have for today. We'll be back with more. Have a good day, everybody.